Sorry, there was this whole live thing. That's right. Hello, my name is Sarah Chesney, and I'm an adult services librarian at the Westland Public Library. Welcome to Beneficial Insects, a natural control for garden pests, presented by Lisa Kilders, who is the Education and Outreach Program Manager with the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District. This program is scheduled to last an hour, and you will receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email. At this time, all of your mics have been shut off. Please use the chat box below in order to ask your questions. This program is part of our annual summer reading program going on now through August 31st. This is an all ages event, but adults 18 years and older can complete 10 reading challenges or activities in order to win a chance to enter our drawing for a $50 Visa gift card. Challenges include reading a mystery book, listening to an audiobook, checking out a cultural pass, or attending a live or recorded program, and much more. A link to the registration will be included in a follow-up email. On July 14th at 6 p.m., we will be holding another virtual program, New Directions with Clematis. Most gardeners think that clematis as a tall, growing vine, but there are many more ways to use them in your garden. Clematis can be ground cover, they can drape from containers, or they can layer horizontally through shrubs. Up is not the only direction. This presentation is led by Linda Butler, my apologies, curator at the Rogerson Clematis Collection and the instructor for the Horticultural Department at Clackamas County College. Registration is required, which will be included in the follow-up email. That's enough for me. I want to present Lisa Kilders. Thank you for coming and talking to us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Let's see. So do you share the screen with me?
You can go ahead and
I can share my screen with you all. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do this then. Here we go. Share. We still have the poll. How do we get rid of the poll?
If you go ahead and hit X at the top of the poll,
it will go away. Ha, perfect. And come on. You want to do the shot? There we go. Okay. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. I'm excited to talk about beneficial insects. I am the Outreach and Education Program Manager at Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District, and I do have my undergraduate degree is in horticulture, so gardening is very near and dear to my heart. Before we go too far, I want to acknowledge Gwendolyn Ellen. She is retired from the Oregon State University Integrated Plant Protection Center, and Gwendolyn's worked hard for many years with a number of farmers to incorporate beneficial insect habitat on their farms and reducing the use of pesticides. So I've taken heavily from her presentation, so thank you to Gwendolyn. And even though a lot of this was presented initially to farmers, that can always be scaled down to the garden levels. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. So does this look like you? Any of these statements? I have to tell you that I have probably said a few of these things, and that was until I started learning about beneficial insects, and it's fascinating. Their world is very fascinating. So I'm very excited to share that with you. Whoa, we don't want to go to the end. Let's go back to, that was the wrong button. Okay, so why do we want beneficial insects in our garden? Well, the value of providing habitat for beneficial insects extends beyond their role of controlling insect pests. The habitat you create can be beautiful while reducing the needs for pesticides. This habitat is also beneficial for your local backyard wildlife. Plants that you've used will also provide habitat, food and shelter actually, for pollinators such as butterflies and hummingbirds, and birds as well, all songbirds. These will benefit. The beneficial insects themselves will become a source of food for birds. And what's a better accompaniment for a beautiful garden than butterflies and birds? Okay, so you might know some of these pests. Let's see if you can see. You can see my pointer, right? I'm hoping, yes. So here we have scale. Probably have seen scale on some of your plants. Usually things get a little sticky around scale, but that's a nasty one to try to get rid of. In the center here we have spider mites. They're very hard to see. They're usually on the underside of a leaf. And a lot of times if you see stippling, which is like a little pinprick yellowing on a leaf, and you turn it over and get a magnifying glass out, and maybe 30 years ago I didn't need one, but now I do, and you see the little dots and you touch them with your fingernail, they'll start running. Those are spider mites. Up here on the corner, those are aphids. We see those a lot, especially if you have roses. Down here in the left-hand bottom, we see thrips. Thrips are often found in flowers. If you have a white tissue and you tap the flower on the tissue and see the insects, those quite often are thrips, and their little back tail will tend to come up. They look like some kind of, I'm sure if they were magnified, they'd look like some kind of nasty sci-fi movie monster. And then on the right-hand side here are mealybugs. And mealybugs have a cottony white covering, and usually with any insects you get some stickiness, although not necessarily with spider mites. So next page. But do you know your beneficial insects? Tell the good guys from the bad guys. Okay, so here we have, up here we have the assassin bug and the nymph. A lot of times the adults do not look at all like the nymphs. We have a lacewing, very beautiful green insect you might see, and this is the nymph. The nymph is the one that actually is doing the hard work. Then over here we have a soldier beetle. I don't unfortunately have a picture of a nymph. Up here we have the minute pirate bug and nymph. Over here is brown beetle. Of course, we've all seen those. Here are ladybugs, but how often have you seen a larvae and not known that that was a larvae of a ladybug? They certainly are not beautiful like their mothers. Down here we have a big-eyed bug and its nymph. Here is a rove beetle, and over here is a Tikkinid fly. So these are the good guys. If you see these, don't spray them. So let's take a closer look. There are three functional groups for beneficial insects. There's the predators, and they truly go through life gorging themselves on pests and sometimes other beneficial insects, but their benefits go far beyond an occasional meal of a fellow beneficial. Then we have the parasitoids. They lay their eggs on or in a garden pest, and that is that developing insect that is the one that does the damage. And a little later on, I have some cool video to show you. So here we have the Parasitic Wasp and the Tikkinid Fly. Then we have pollinators, which are also considered a beneficial insect. And while their pollinators are very necessary for food production, nearly 75% of the world's crops require a pollinator. They're not all natural enemies for crop garden pests. Now there is an exception, and the exception are hornets and yellow jackets, who provide some minor pollination benefits, but they will in fact prey on pests like grasshoppers and caterpillars. We could spend a number of sessions on pollinators, but since we have limited time this evening, we are going to concentrate on the predators and the parasitoids.
And we had somebody ask, are these all beneficial insects?
These are all beneficial insects. There's three functional groups: the parasitoid, or the predators, the parasitoids, and the pollinators. Okay, and I wouldn't necessarily always call a hornet or a yellow jacket beneficial, but when they're eating grasshoppers, yeah, they count. Okay, so we are going to look at predators first. These predators are insects, and yes, some non-insects such as spiders, mites, and harvestmen. Harvestman is what we normally know as a daddy longlegs. And we compare, and then they actively hunt, attack, and eat their prey. Some, like the ground beetles, the assassin bugs, and spiders, are generalists. They will eat almost anything they can handle, whereas the lacewings, the predatory flies, and the mites have a narrower palate. So here we go. We have ground beetles, and they're generalists. These guys are like little mini tanks. They often kill more prey than they can eat, and they hide and often lay eggs in the soil. So they benefit highly from undisturbed soil. So a lot of times in a perennial garden, this would be a great place to find or to have habitat. That's a good habitat for the ground beetles because you don't go in there and normally till it up. If you are trying to provide habitat in a vegetable garden, say, you want to leave maybe every other row undisturbed, and then the next year plant the other row so that you always have some areas that are undisturbed and can be a shelter or habitat for your ground beetles. So these guys, they lay eggs. Their larvae will also overwinter in grass clumps. And we're going to circle back to that later, but they like it high and dry. So if you have ornamental grasses in your garden, quite often they can use that clump of grass to overwinter. They prey on some of our most hated insects. A ground beetle will eat slugs, snails, caterpillars, and soft-bodied insects like lygus bugs and aphids. And you might ask, well, how are these guys that are ground dwellers, how do they get to the aphids? Well, any aphid that happens to fall to the ground, they get close enough to the ground for one of these beetles to reach it, they're goners. Okay, so we also have true bugs. Now, true bugs are also predators, but they occur on foliage and flowers. So we're looking at kind of layers here. While the ground beetles, they take care of the ground, these guys work in the upper levels. The big-eyed bug, they prey on all stages of spider mites, flea beetles, thrips, leafhoppers, aphids, and corn earworms. The minute pirate bugs, they prey on all stages of spider mites, flea beetles, thrips, leafhoppers, aphids. Oh, I'm sorry, I started reading that one. The minute pirate bugs, they're thrips, mites, scales, aphids, small caterpillars, and various insect eggs. So they cover quite a few as well. We have a predaceous stink bug. Now you're probably aware of the plant-eating stink bug, which this is not. This one will actually prey upon small insects, eggs, caterpillars, and beetle larvae. Then we have the damsel bugs and the assassin bugs. Damsel bugs prey on cabbage worms, armyworms, lygus bugs, and others, and they use a toxin to subdue their prey before they eat it. The assassin bugs, now they're generalists, so they eat a wide range of pests, again, often killing more than they can eat, but they are very interesting. They will actually ambush a prey, and they'll also attack some small flying insects, so they're actually kind of fun to watch if you get the chance. So these predators here that we're showing, they require not only the predator, the crop pest, but they also require pollen and nectar to survive. So it's quite often the adults need this additional food to reproduce. So maintaining flowering plants throughout the season is key to supporting these beneficial insects because they do need that pollen and nectar. You want to have flowers with easily accessible nectar. They're the best ones to plant for these particular insects. So take a close look at what you've planted. Do you have this type of flower blooming all year? So it's, we all like to have flowers blooming all year. So take a look at what's blooming. Look, take notes in the spring. What's blooming? What's next? What's next? Make sure that something is going on all season. I also want to point out here that it's not always the adult insect that is the voracious predator. If you look at the larvae of the aphid or the hoverfly, the hoverflies and the lacewings, they're the larvae are the champion pest eaters. In fact, the larvae of the lacewing has earned a nickname of aphid lion, as they can consume up to 400 aphids each week. And this one here is the lacewing. This is the aphid lion. Although I have to tell you, the lady beetle larvae does a pretty darn good job as well. Okay, let's go on to parasitoids. Parasitoids, we have the parasitic wasps, and parasitic wasps do not sting. Their stingers have evolved into ovipositors that lay eggs on or in or near a host insect. The larvae develops and feeds on the hosts, and it eventually kills it. Many parasitic wasps are host-specific, meaning they only attack one type of pest, but they are highly effective. The Tikkinid flies over here, They don't have an ovipositor, but they do lay their eggs on or near their target host, but not inside the host. So you can see the caterpillar here. If you have a caterpillar and you see the eggs on top, don't kill that caterpillar, because that's the egg of the beneficial insect. That insect will take care of that caterpillar, plus it provides food for all those other Tikkinid flies to hatch and then go after the other caterpillars. Well, before I forget, these parasitoids also need the pollen and the nectar sources to reproduce, and so their offspring are the ones that feed on the larvae. So here again, as long as you have flowers blooming from early spring to late fall, you are providing habitat for both the parasitoids and the predators. So here is something really fun. This is a parasitic wasp, and it is going to attack or lay its eggs in this unsuspecting aphid. Let's show you this video. So the stinger, it's evolved into an ovipositor. That aphid does not know what's happening to it, and as that egg inside of that aphid develops, and you can see, here we go. It develops. It will eat that insect from the inside out, killing it, making an aphid mummy. And aphid mummies are this swollen-looking aphid. You can see on the bottom right, they're kind of whitish. They could be blackish, depending on the type of aphid it is, or the parasitic wasp that's attacked it. And then what comes out of it is a fully developed adult parasitic wasp that can go on and actually take out more aphids. So if you do have an aphid, let's get them all the way out of there. If you do have an aphid infestation, you will want to check to make sure you don't have any aphid mummies in there. If you do, leave it alone. Your beneficial insects will take care of it for you. Okay, so in a 2002 review, there have been studies, and in a 2002 review of field studies, it shows that in 75% of the cases, the generalist predators reduce pest numbers significantly. And aphids can also be effectively controlled by beneficial insects, such as that parasitic wasp that we just saw. So it's not a waste of time to do this, but you will have to think about this. You cannot have good control of your insect pest infestations if you do not have beneficial insects ready and present to attack. Therefore, you always have to have a small population of the pest. This garden that you have that's going to be beautiful and reduced use of pesticides are always going to have some pests. So you need to resolve in your mind where your tolerance level will be before you resort to a pesticide. And the first step is determined, if you see an insect, a pest, you want to go in and look and see, do you have any of your beneficial insects present? And on the information sheet that was sent to you before this presentation this evening, there is a field chart. It's the natural pests natural, I can't remember, control, or it talks about pests and their natural control. And in it will be a whole chart showing pictures of insect pests and the beneficial insects themselves. So you can take that with you into the field and take a look and see if you have some of these beneficials present. And it's a good thing to have in the field with you. If anyone is interested, you can contact me and I can get you a paper copy of that particular product. But you can take it out, look for your beneficial insects. When scouting for these insects, you want to know when they're active, and many insects wait until the day's warmed up before they, from the cool night temperatures. So the best time to look is between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. There are some insects that are nocturnal feeders, like a lot of the ground beetles. So you can make a pit trap of 2 sizes of yogurt containers. You'll want to make sure that you have, you put the smaller yogurt container, I believe, I can't remember, but if you look at pit traps, homemade pit traps, it will tell you the reason you want to do that, to see if you have the ground beetles is because you want to have a place for the smaller beetles to get away from the big ones, because they'll eat the small ones before you see them in the morning, so you really won't know how many beetles you have. But if your buddies are there, if your beneficial insects are there, then you know it's not an overnight cure for your insect pests, but they will take care of them. And it's a great way to keep your garden beautiful and reduce your pesticide use. Okay, so additional information that you'll want to know when looking for your beneficial insects is, what do the eggs look like? They don't look at all like the adults or the larvae. On the top left here, we have the lacewing, and they have beautiful eggs. They're delicate, and they the egg is actually balanced on the end of that lovely little pedestal, and it's quite distinctive, so keep an eye out for that. Then we have the lady beetle eggs, and they're in clusters. They're elliptical and yellow-orange in color. And the lady beetles tend to be specialist predators of aphids and scales. So look for egg clusters near a group of aphids or scales. Then the syrphid fly, that little guy that tends to looks like a little bee, but he buzzes. Sometimes I think they are looking at you straight in the eye, and then they fly away. They're very small, but they're known as a hoverfly or a flower fly. And they lay cream-colored oval eggs, like this one here, among their prey. So usually aphids, scales, mealybugs, spider mites, and thrips. If you see this little egg there, you'll know that the syrphid fly is around. And then just for kicks, I threw in a praying mantis egg. These praying mantis, they make a protective case around their eggs, and it's usually on a plant stem or branch. The praying mantis, they're opportunistic eaters, so they're not an effective biocontrol, as they eat both pests and other beneficial insects, but they are pretty cool. Okay, so we also need to know what the larvae look like, so we don't wipe out the real workhorses of the beneficial insect world. How many times have you seen this alligator-looking larvae of the lady beetle and thought you were being invaded by some other weird alien insect? Instead of saying, geez, first I get an infestation of aphids, and then I top it off with this other nasty looking pest, it's not bad at all, because that's the one that's taking care of your aphid. The assassin bugs, they have nymphs that are much more delicate looking than the adults. The lacewing, well, the lacewing is the aphid lion, and it's definitely not one that you want to kill, but it also does not look like its beautiful adult, the very delicate looking green lacewing. And then the syrphid fly, the syrphid fly or hoverfly larvae can eat up to 50 aphids a day, so they are true allies for you. And you can see they look like a little green worm in amongst your aphids. So if you see these, don't spray. Okay, so I know we're purposely not covering native pollinators, but there is some good news. Even though we have 400 species of native pollinators in America and over 600 in Oregon, there's ground nesters, there's tunnel nesters, there's the bumblebees that are a social cavity nester. The good news is, where are my good news? The pollinators and the beneficial insects basically need most of the same resources. So when you make your habitat for beneficial insects, you are benefiting the pollinators. And so when you begin supplying the resources for the beneficial insects, you also increase the biodiversity of your garden, which is always positive. And the beneficial insects will reduce the need for your pesticides, make a healthier garden for you, for everybody, including you and your family. So what does it mean to provide habitat for beneficial insects? Well, to be successful, you need to think like an insect. What do they need? They need shelter. They need places to hide from pesticides if you do spray, or if their neighbor is spraying and it's blowing over to your yard. And that's like ground covers or grasses where they can get in and hide. So let's talk a minute about using pesticides. If you determine that you don't have any allies or no beneficial insects in your garden, but you have an infestation, try to do a manual removal if you can. Prune out an area that's infected with your garden pests. But if you do have more than you can possibly stand, and you do want to apply a pesticide, you need to do it responsibly. We probably all know basic rules. Make sure the chemical is listed for the specific insect that you're targeting. A broad spectrum insecticide will kill everything, including your beneficial insect. So try to be as targeted and specific as possible. And they should have accompanying information sheets on the container, or have a website where you can go read about that pesticide. Be sure that you're using the pesticide that is for your specific insect. And if it says use 1 tablespoon in a gallon, using 2 does not make it work better. These chemicals have been tested to figure out what concentration is the most effective. Use their recommendation and you'll get much better control and have to apply fewer times. Use only a systemic pesticide, and that's one that goes into like the blood system of the plant, because it will go into the pollen or the nectar and the pollen. So when your pollinators come in, they will actually die from that pesticide. So use a contact pesticide and spray before or after pollinators will be moving around in the garden. So try to do it early in the morning before the pollinators are around, or do it in the evening when they've all gone home. And try to avoid flowers. Try not to spray flowers directly, because you do not want to affect your pollinators. Don't spray on a windy day. Always wear protective gear, because we love you too. Okay, so back to our regularly scheduled program here. Beneficial insects need shelter from pesticides and soil disturbances. So perennial beds are great, as you usually don't disturb the soil much there as you would in a vegetable garden. They need places to hunt and hunt prey, and so you need an actual population of your garden pest. So remember, think what your tolerance levels are. And they need places to reproduce and food like pollen and nectar to support their larvae to reproduce, so that they have larvae that will do the big heavy lifting for them. And a place to overwinter. And this can be things like leaf litter, rock crevices, burrows in the soil. Cut back on some of your fall cleanup. Clumping grasses like fescues and miscanthus, or fountain grasses, maiden grasses, switch grasses. These all give your insects a place to hide and overwinter. So don't cut them off to the ground. Leave some of this stuff. Any kind of hollow-stemmed flowers or plants, leave those for the winter, because a lot of your insects, say your mason bees, may have laid their eggs in those hollow stems. So just relax in the fall, leave it till spring when you know things are safe to clean up and your beneficial insects have had a chance to reproduce. So the general rule of thumb in providing habitat: have something blooming from early spring to late fall. Think of your garden as having layers. Shrink down to the insect size. Are there ground covers, middle level flowers, taller flowers and shrubs, and even flowering trees? Look at the shape of the flowers that you have for these insects. Beneficial insects use pollen and nectar to survive, and they tend to be small. So they need small flowers that exist in clusters, kind of like having a McDonald's on every corner. They won't have to fly very far to find the next nectar source. Go for flattish flowers that are easily accessible pollen and nectar. So the tubular shaped flowers, they're really not going to do anything for your beneficial insects. They may be great for your hummingbirds, so have those, but you also need the flat, simple flowers. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, here's a few tips. Leave an open area, bare ground, with a little brush pile on top, and this will provide a good place for the soil nesters and pollinators that may use hollow stems for nesting, or nest in the ground. Provide water. And we're not talking about a swimming pool. I'm sure you've been in a swimming pool before and see that poor little insect that tried to drink from the pool, and they usually drown. Bird baths, small divots and saucers that are shaped, that will have shaped so that the water can collect, and even spraying foliage in the morning will help. Actually, having just a muddy area at certain times of the day will help these insects get water. One thing to think about: if you have some of these beautiful bird baths that have a smooth edge, It's not only hard for the birds to grasp onto those, but it's also hard for the beneficial insects to get to the water. So try getting a stick, not terribly long, but something that they can land on, the birds and the insects, and then crawl down to the water safely. So leave grasses untouched over winter. Step back a little from your fall cleanup. Plant flowers in blocks. The really small beneficial insects don't fly very far, and blocks of flowers are easier for pollinators to find as well. Okay, finally, let's take a look at plants. That's the fun part. I'm not advocating that you take out your ornamentals, but native plants are better adapted for our region and our native beneficial insects. You also will have benefit from any other ornamentals, but make sure that if you buy a cultivated variety, that it does have actual pollen in the flowers. Sometimes they've been bred out. So anytime you can add native plants, it's always a great addition to your garden. We do highly recommend then incorporating the natives, and you know, some of them are very beautiful. So get a hold of some of the native plant guides. Take a look and see what native plants have to offer. You might be surprised. And there is also a native plant finder, a couple of them on that list of resources that were sent out to you today. Okay, so let's talk about the most useful types of flowers to provide food for our insect friends. The flowers in the carrot family. These are umbel flowers like the angelica, like we have here, and they have a lot of tiny flowers very close together, so small insects do not have far to fly for the next meal. And a lot of times you'll see this on this picture itself. You can see probably 5 or 6 insects on there that are taking advantage of that food source. We also have the mustard family. This includes Arissimum, mustards, Erebus, and rockcress. These are beautiful early blooming spring perennials, and they're perfect for rock gardens and garden borders, so they're good for your beneficial insects. And then, of course, the aster family. That includes not only asters, but sunflowers, chrysanthemums, marigolds. They're all lovely additions to your garden, and they tend to bloom later in the season, so you're getting that extended season of food. But the common denominator is a simple flower that has nectar and pollen that's very accessible for those small beneficial insects. Insectary plants, when you get into some of these publications that resources that have been provided, they talk about insectary plants. And that is just a plant that provides shelter, food, nesting, or overwintering places for our insect friends. So think flowering grasses, bunch grasses, and plants with hollow stems. Those are insectary plants. Just want to make sure that you don't think something else is being thrown at you there. Okay, and here we go. Early bloomers, here's some suggestions. Even willow, pussy willows, those willows have pollen on them and they bloom very early in the spring. So that's another option. We have Indian plums, red flowering currant, and of course Oregon grapes. And those are perfect flowers for all of our pollinators and our beneficial insects. And the mason bees, they come out much earlier than the European honeybees because they're tougher. Those European honeybees, they like it a little warmer. So you need to have something available for those mason bees to eat. Then the late bloomers, we have Bidens. Bidens is often found in a hanging basket, but they're also great ground covers. They'll bloom all season. They're an annual, of course, but they are a good provider of pollen. We have the fall blooming asters, the sunflowers, of course. Everyone loves sunflowers because they're so bright and cheery. And then we have things like gaillardias or echinacеas, and they also bloom late into the season. So these are all great additions to your gardens. There are so many plants to add that your beneficial insects will be happy, your neighbors will be happy, and you'll just really enjoy sitting out and enjoying your garden this coming year. So even let your herbs and your coleus go to seed because you see here on I think this might be, looks like maybe some basil, I don't know, but your herbs can be a source of food for your beneficial insects. So just get out there and enjoy your plants and let it go wild. Let's talk really quickly about beetle bumps. We talked earlier about ground beetles. Ground beetles like it high and dry. And in the UK especially, they're using beetle banks in a lot of their farming fields, where they have a raised area about 3 feet, and they've planted it with grasses and also some perennial flowering things like basket of gold type things to provide food for the beneficial insects. But this is an area that the beetles like because they don't like to be wet. It's higher up, there's good drainage, there's grasses for them to nest in and overwinter in, and they will actually go out into the field and do a wonderful job of controlling insects in a farmer's field. You can do the same thing in a garden. I did one a few years back when I lived in Tigard, and I had maybe a 3x4 little raised area, and I put some ornamental grasses, some perennial flowers in there, and it was great. It looked beautiful. It didn't look like any kind of weird thing that was in my garden for beneficial insects, but it was, and it was actually very successful. So there is on the back side of that chart I mentioned earlier about the natural enemies for our insect crops, crop pests. On the back side talks about beetle banks. It also talks, I think there's an article in there about beetle banks. So you can do a modified one in your yard, and that will give you an extra boost for your ground beetles. So if you were a beneficial insect, would you want to live here or would you want to live here? So be kind to your friends and they will eat your pests for you. Thank you for inviting me here this evening. Does anyone have any questions? I can.
To be honest, I want to live with the flowers too. So
we all do. Brooke gave us a thumbs up. She wants to live there too.
I've allowed everybody to unmute themselves if they wanted to ask any questions, or you can add it to the text. I have a question to get us started. One of the things that really stuck out to me is you mentioned an undisturbed ground that you let over season stay bare. Is there a general recommendation in size that would be ideal for
No, it doesn't have to be large. If you have a back corner or an area behind a shed that you can just leave to bare ground and put a few shrub, branches or things over the top for to protect it a little bit, that is great habitat, especially for the ground nesting pollinators, because it keeps them out of way, out of where you would be walking around, and it gives them a good protected area to build their nests.
So one of our attendees asked, and I've actually seen this too, I read recently that you shouldn't buy ladybugs to add to your yard. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, you can do that, but the bad part is if you don't have a habitat to support those ladybugs, they're going to fly off to somebody else's backyard and you won't have anything. If you build it, I know this dates me, I'm a Kevin Costner fan, but if you build it, they will come. So if you have a habitat for them, you will see ladybugs coming into your yard.
Excellent. Keep adding your comments or questions. One thing that was just shocking was the Aphid Mummies. What are the general sizes when you're looking through the plants of the mummies?
The Aphid Mummies,
mm-hmm.
They are just slightly larger than a live aphid. They're just kind of swollen, and they're just swollen looking. They don't look like they have legs anymore, and they're a different color than the aphids. So it's pretty easy to spot them if you actually get, and I'd recommend if you really want to get into this, just get a little hand lens. It doesn't have to be much, just a little magnifying glass you get at, the grocery store or wherever, and get out there and start looking around, because the insect world is really fascinating. And if you see these aphid mummies, let it go, because they have things under control, and they will take care of your aphids. Also, and I know a lot of people have bare area under their roses, but almost always you get aphids. I get aphids on my roses. Plant alyssum underneath there. Alyssum is a perfect flower for some of these beneficial insects, especially the ones that attack aphids. And it's a good source of food for them. And they're close to the aphids that are living on your roses that you don't want there. So, take a chance and put some alyssum around your rose gardens.
Yeah. So more questions about the ladybugs. Does
Mhm.
it matter if they are or if they're native or non-native ladybugs?
It doesn't. We'd love to have native ones, but I know that you get what you get. And the habitat's the same.
Yeah.
And they'll do the job.
Yeah, it says it seems like even the non-beneficiary insects serve a purpose.
Yeah.
If can you talk about some of these non-native bugs serving a purpose? You talked
Um,
some of them are just the beneficiary of the eggs.
yeah, I don't really know I have not gone into enough of the insect ID. That is the hardest part about getting out there and working with beneficial insects is learning to identify every one of them. And that is, I'm working on. I am by no means an expert on that. But there is some really good, there's a resource I want to share with you. It's put out by the Xerces Society, and it's called Farming with Beneficial Insects. It's a wonderful book. It has so much information. It has wonderful pictures, and I highly recommend it if you want to go into more detail about beneficial insects.
And I will include that in the list of resources that get sent out to you later.
Yeah, and if you go to the Xerces Society website, just go under their publications and find it, Farming with Beneficial Insects.
Yeah. And then one question that I often see on some gardening groups that I follow is how long should you leave your leaves out? Or, take that casual approach of letting your yard grow and stuff like that. How far into the spring should you allow that to happen? Are most of these like early, I assume that they grow throughout the spring season, but do they grow earlier in the spring season or later in the season?
Well, if you leave the leaves out, a lot of them are going to just decompose, and they're really going to be good for your soil as well as for your beneficial insects and the other insects that are overwintering. The only time I would definitely not do it is if you have a plant that's diseased. If you have a plant that's diseased, get those leaves out of there, get rid of them, dispose of them, don't leave them, because you do not want, if it's the disease, to be overwintering in those leaves. But a lot of those leaves are going to decompose, and in the spring, it's just a little cleanup. It's not that much. You'll be cutting back, and mostly just cutting back old dead stems and taking that out. And whenever it's nice enough to get out and work it, then just go do it.
Especially in Oregon.
Especially in Oregon. You have to, depends on how comfortable you are in your rain gear.
Yeah, and you were talking about grass mounds actually being beneficial to some beetles.
Those are beneficial. In the spring, you'll want to get out and cut it before they start growing, because then you'll have a nice looking clump grass.
So it's more for aesthetics than it is benefit, or in terms of it won't harm the bugs if you let it grow out too much.
Well, no, you let it grow. You cut it back, and you'll still have a base there. Mm-hmm. But you'll want to cut it back in the spring before your grass starts to grow, because then cutting it back is a little difficult with the new stuff coming in.
Yeah. I have to say that I actually did see a lady beetle larvae in my house. It was brought in by my dog, and I was just like, I'm just about to attend a program. I'm going to put you outside until I learn what you are. And I'm so happy I did, because it did look terrestrial. You are right.
Yeah, they do. They do. They're scary looking.
Does anybody else have any other questions? And it seems like any flower is a beneficial flower, except for like the long tubular ones.
Well, long tubular ones, you want a simple one. A lot of flowers don't have easily accessible pollen. So flatter ones are good. Then a lot of your cultivated varieties don't have necessarily pollen. So you want to make sure, incorporate some natives, incorporate some of the plants that do have the type of accessible pollen, and then have the other stuff too, but just make sure that you have enough of the easily accessible flowering plants available.
And water. I love the idea. That's genius. So, the stick in the
stick in the yeah. I learned that with my beautiful bird bath, that the birds can't hold on to it. So I have a big stick that I put in, and they get down in there and everybody's happy.
Or possibly rocks or pebbles that you can.
As long as it's they can land on it where they can see that it's above the water. Yeah.
Yeah, stable. Mm-hmm. And then I think that was it for my question. I was taking a lot of notes. I'm like, ooh, this is cold. Any other questions for our guest? Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you, Lisa, for coming out and talking to us. I've learned so much, and I hope you all did too. Again, all of this information will be sent out to those who attended today, as well as provided on our YouTube. So if you wanted to share it with your friends, you could. I hope you all get to come to the library. We're now open for general browsing, but you can still pick up your holds. And then we have, again, in July, the new directions of clematis. Thank you again, Lisa.
Mm-hmm. Thank you,
everybody, for joining us tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Good night.